Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a brand new series from myself that I hope you guys are going to really enjoy. As ever, please do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share and help build this channel and of course the community. And don't forget the hashtag TeamFEAR. Without further ado, let's get into the first part of tonight's brand new series entitled Escobar's Lost Journals, Diablo Dogs. Let's get straight into that. Chapter 1. One man's junk is another man's gold. As the young man ran further and further into the labyrinth of decay, darkness and death, only his heavy breathing to accompany him, water dripped and pooled onto the floor, soaking his once white sneakers in black filth. His only light that of a small flaming torch, its faint glow casting eerie shadows on the tunnel-like structure that seems to never end, its dim light piercing a feeble few feet in front. How had the others fared? He knew some had died horrific deaths at the hands of those monstrous dogs. As he continued his vain journey into the belly of the beast, he found himself at a crossroads of sorts. Two directions to pick from, each as dark as where he had just been. Catching his breath for a moment, he began trying to listen for any sign of anything. Wind, screaming, anything that could foretell which tunnel to avoid and which to trust. Silence. At first he thought he heard his name being called. Then he thought he could hear the slightest of breezes whistling down the tunnel to the left. Puzzled, confused from being sedated and scared beyond all meaning of the word, he chose to take the left tunnel. His only hope was a slight cool breeze drifting out from the ominous darkness. Suddenly, a mighty howl, low and mixed with a screech, bled its way through the entire underground system, the man stopping dead in his tracks. As not long after the blood-chilling howl died down, there was a definitive sound of heavy, thumping footfalls. Huge, laboured, wheezing breaths getting closer and closer. The young man, desperate to avoid detection by these beasts, decides to run like the wind. The heavy thumping still gets louder and louder. Suddenly, he spots a new tunnel and makes a quick dive into it, hoping he has been quick enough to avoid being seen. As he stumbles back to his feet, he continues to hear the beast coming ever closer. Its hyena-like laugh sending shudders up and down the man's spine. Moments later, the man's heart nearly jumps out of his chest as darkness finally gives way to a solid iron grate. On the other side, a group of people stand, wide-eyed, staring back at him. Their faces tell all he needed to know, as the thumping footfalls are now just a few meters away. They themselves slowed their heavy pace as the beast had found its target. The group of people continue to watch on as the poor helpless young man slowly turns to face his fate head on. His knees almost given out as the monster dog or wolf nightmare creeps closer into the light of the torch that now lays on the floor next to his victim's legs. On all fours, this beast is standing head height, now very much eye to eye with the man. All is too much as the man loses control of his bowels. The group sneering and laughing, the wolf-like beast lowering its head ever so slightly to bask in its victim's fear. Before suddenly, and without fuss, lunging at the man's face, jaws engulfing his head almost in one. A slight tug to the left, then right, and pop. The crowd returning its devilish efforts with cheers as the beast finished what it had started and began to feed. Soon it would rise up and begin searching for the next victim in Escobar's gauntlet. 32 years later. For my own safety and peace of mind, I'm going to change my name for the sake of retelling this story. You can call me David. What I'm about to tell you is my own living nightmare. It follows me wherever I go. Even in my sleep, I cannot escape the horrors of what I have seen. I guess I'll start where it all began. The moment that would change my life forever. I was 28, living alone but financially set. I had a booming logging company handed down from my grandfather to my father and so on. Now, nearer my 30s, I found myself bored and frustrated with the same routine. Work, sleep. Work, sleep. You get the idea. Anyway, I soon found myself searching the strange and dark corners of the dark web. And at first, it was just something to pass the mundane evenings. Sat drinking good bourbon, listening to Led Zeppelin and scratching my nuts. Yeah, as I said, a lonely life. So for a few months, I scrolled through endless pages and forums. If you had a kink, you could accommodate it here. Looking to have someone slumped? Yep, it was readily available. Although I never ventured too far into those forums. No, I was more interested in buying rare art. Money-making schemes, low risk, high dividends. I managed to make a couple of $100,000 in trading gold bullion and rare fancy diamonds. The odd antiquity too. It's through the latter that I met someone. A user by the name Blanco312. He approached me late one Sunday night. I was just about ready to hit the sack when I received a message on a bid for some French art piece. I sat back down and read through the message. Hi, DDog84. I don't know, don't judge my username. I told you, I enjoy good bourbon. DDog84. I have been watching your movements over the last few months. I can see you have a fine eye for the sweeter things in life. I have a proposition for you. I think you will be very pleased indeed. Okay, go ahead, I replied. Excellent. May I call you David? He questioned. Sure, go ahead, I replied, although a little spooked that he knew my real name. Well, I have a proposition of a rare and very sought-after set of documents, or journal, if you like. Tell me, David, are you familiar with the deceased Pablo Escobar? I was a little bit puzzled at first, but nevertheless intrigued. Yes, I am, I replied, still unsure where the hell this was going. Excellent. Then you will no doubt be aware of the monumental amount of wealth the late Mr. Escobar acquired during his reign as El Señor. Gold, diamonds and dollars. Lots of dollars. In fact, as you know, much of his wealth was taken out deep into the Colombian jungle of Caqueta. Yes, I knew the story. Those who knew these locations were executed immediately. I interrupted. Look, it's late. What's your point? I asked with the little patience I had left. Okay. I am an old man now. I spent many years trekking through that jungle looking for anything that was left behind. I found a few stashes of gold bullion and about 150,000 US dollars. But age has caused my efforts to slowly dwindle, to the point where I can no longer make it to that foreboding jungle. My savings are all but spent trying to fund my endeavours. But a few years ago, I found an old underground bunker set way back into the jungle hills. It was practically bare inside, save for blankets and tinned food and spent shell casings. However, it wasn't entirely fruitless. You see, hidden in a small dugout that was close by, I stumbled upon a large flat rock. It caught my eye by pure chance as I stumbled and tripped. I made my way back from where I'd come and I took a closer look and began working my knife around the outside edges of the slab of oddly dark rock. You see, every other piece of exposed rock were either grey to a green colour from the humidity, etc. I knew, instantly, this rock did not belong. A few moments later, I prized its cold, hard surface back to reveal a small leather satchel. Inside was the personal journal of Señor Pablo Emilio Escobar. His thoughts, plans and patterns for movements of his wealth and of course cocaine syndicate. Okay, I replied. How does this have anything of interest to myself? I added. Because, David, within the documents and journal there were well-drawn maps and coordinates. Don't you see? You have the maps to his fortune. You just have to go and get it. I took a big sip of my bourbon and lit a cigarette. How do I know you're not sending me on a one-way trip? I mean, you pop up and expect me to go all the way down to Colombia. Man, this sounds fishy to me, I added. Okay then, will this convince you, Señor? Moments later, he sent 2 photos, of what I would assume was himself, standing outside a dilapidated concrete structure. Then, the infamous black slab of rock, and finally, the leather satchel. He also sent me further images of the gold he had found years before, and sure enough, it was buried right there, in the jungle. I was still suspicious, but well, this was what my life needed, or so I thought. We conversed for many hours right into the early morning hours, when finally I asked the golden question. How much is it going to cost? $250,000, he replied. I nearly choked on my hot coffee, spilling the hot liquid all over my lap. 250k? Are you for real? I replied. Yes, senor, very serious. You know as well as anyone how much money or gold, or who knows what else, could be just sitting there, waiting to be found. He was right. There potentially could be millions in cash. Who knows how much gold? All right, old man, but in one condition. You get half now and the rest when I return. No can do, senor. I guess I misjudged you. Goodbye. No, wait, I replied frantically. Wait, just wait a second. I'll drop 200k into your account right now. The rest when I return. It's the best I can do. There was a short pause as I anxiously watched the cursor on my computer screen blinking idly. Okay, senor, you have yourself a deal. I sat back breathing a sigh of relief. We went about exchanging details and I made a payment. He then instructed me to write down a 10-digit code for a secure bank vault deposit box, which is where the satchel, etc. were located. My heart was thumping as I realised this could just be one huge scam that I'd fallen for. But then that little voice in my head reminded me, what if it wasn't? I had to call my best friend Brian, who had been like a brother to me. He wouldn't pass up something like this. He was, after all, a history buff and had travelled all over the world in search of adventure and girls. As soon as I could, I wasted no more time. I called Brian, filling him in on the details. I grabbed together all my gear I would need except for a few items. I was pretty much prepared. The next morning, I jumped into my truck and burnt rubber over to Brian's house. Brian was more excited than I, as I told him everything the old man had told me. And within half an hour, he was down and we collected his things. With everything set, I grabbed my car keys and we flew out the door, heading straight to the bank vault on Southside Boulevard. Walking into the deposit room was quite a daunting task. Heavily built armed guards throughout the bank and two within the deposits area of the vault. Thousands and thousands of boxes, all numbered each with a unique 10-digit code. I noticed that I had begun sweating profusely as I scanned around the vault hallways. The whole time the guards eyeballing myself and Brian. I hadn't a clue where I was supposed to be looking, but I had no choice. I was now 200 bags down. After what seemed like an hour of relentless searching, I found my mark. It had to have been one of the original accounts in the vault, as the box surrounding the boxes was worn slightly compared to the rest of the vault boxes. Plus, it was set far back into the area. I felt I and Brian had already raised enough suspicion with our gormless searching high and low, and I waited no longer. Opening the deposit box and looking inside, I could see one leather satchel, some documentation that looked old and damaged from the effects of time. Grabbing everything, I noticed a little note stuck to the back of the box. It read as follows. Now that you have what you need, in search of gold through dark jungle trees, follow your instincts, trust your nose, keep an eye out in the jungle for those dark shadows. They creep and crawl in search of torment and food. Sleep with one eye open, make sure it's not you. Beware the Diablo dogs. What? I thought aloud. What do you think it means? Asked Brian. Hell if I know. He's probably trying to spook us or something, I replied dryly. Collecting the notes as we made our way out of the vault and bank and back to my truck. Still, as strange as that little note was, I was pumped and excited. Wasting no more time, I drove straight to the airport, catching the next flight to Enrique Olaya Herrera Airport, Colombia. As we flew, Brian and I went about researching what to expect from the harsh jungle environment. I mean, sure, we both trekked through dangerous, humid areas many times, but this was on a whole new level. It was, after all, part of the Amazonias. I myself was more intrigued by, I guess, that damn cryptic note. Diablo dogs. Well, After some digging online, I managed to find a bunch of information regarding old folklore, legends of dark spirit creatures in the jungle. Creatures that were known to stalk from tree to tree, but you would only see their glowing red eyes, or glistening of sharp talon-like claws as the moonlight shone high in the sky. There were even reports of them dragging the old and young by their feet from their beds out through an open window, kicking and screaming until abruptly stopped. Records showed high numbers of animal attacks in and around the cities and jungles. Whatever these Diablo dogs were, it wasn't good. Soon, I was asleep, and my dreams were not for the faint of heart. No, just recalling them chills my blood. Brian and I were now deep into the godforsaken jungle. The humidity was relentless, and our clothing stuck to our bodies like wet rags. The jungle was so dense and so dark, so very dark. I was leading with Brian on my 6 the whole way through, when at first it was the bugs and reptiles. They all seemed to disappear at once. We carried on hacking and cutting our way through the brush and vines, their former dark and light greens and browns, now seemingly black or grey. The entire jungle was sinister and twisted, and soon Brian whispered, "David, David." "What?" I replied anxiously. "David, haven't you noticed?" "Noticed what, Brian?" I added. "The jungle. It's completely silent," he replied with a shake in his voice. "Yes, I noticed that about 10 minutes ago," I replied. Suddenly, there was a creaking of tree limbs above our heads, and we both instantly turned our attention to the canopy, but could not make out anything. Then a second later, an almighty crashing from our rear left flank, and thump, faint cry, and whoosh. I looked just in time to see an enormous, dark, hairy creature smashing its way through the trees and vines and brush, with Brian under its long arm, his face of pure terror. I screamed, "No!" and I awoke to one of the cabin crew nudging me awake. "Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. Sir, are you okay? Do you need a doctor?" Brian had been asleep as well. He too woke up in a panic, his brow sweating and face as pale as a sheet of paper. I guess I looked the same as I wiped my own forehead, and it too was covered in beads of sweat. Hastily I replied, No, we're okay, thank you, ma'am. We just had a little bit too much to drink, or the duty-free." It seemed to work, as her face changed from concerned to one of a pleasant smile. "Okay, sir. Well, take care. Maybe fix yourself some food in the airport before you go out into the heat outside." With that, she nodded and went about her duties. I looked at Brian, and he still had the same expression on his face. Did you have a weird dream?" he asked before necking the rest of his soda water. I looked at him in the eye, a bead of sweat still running its course down his brow to his sideburn. "Yeah, I definitely had a strange nightmare. I wouldn't call it a dream. It was horrific and what?" he interrupted. "It was too real, man. Too damn real," I replied. "Come on, let's get out of here and get to the hotel," Brian said. "All right, man, let's go," I replied, and we made our way out of the airport. Man, did we have fun with the customs. It took us hours to finally collect all of our luggage and gear. We told the officials we were shooting a BBC documentary about nature and life in Medellin, and they seemed to buy it. And so finally, we caught a cab into Medellin and pulled up at this beat-up, run-down, barely-standing looking hostel on the outskirts of the town. It was already something like 7:30 p.m, so you would think the streets would be bustling with people going about their business. But it wasn't. Far from it, actually. The only thing that was alive and moving around was a stray mangy dog and ourselves. The cab driver looked creeped out for sure, as he looked left and right over his shoulder whilst Brian settled his money. Then, without any goodbye or hesitation, he hit the gas pedal to the floor and bleached his tyres out of there and off down the winding streets until even the revving of his engine was gone. I turned to grab my bags, and Brian was petting the mangy dog on its head and telling him what a good boy he was. "Brian, come on, man. Gonna get rabies or dog AIDS or something." He looked happier than a damn dog. "Okay, bro, let's check in." I'll save you the boring details with a hotel clerk, but let's just say it was not like 5-star service. The guy barely made eye contact and wore these goofy sunglasses, even though the place was dark and dank throughout. It's like they had every shutter on every window closed and locked. Ceiling fans humming with endless rotations. Anyway, we had some beers and settled down for some sleep around 11 o'clock that night. At around 4:15 a.m, Brian shook me awake in an absolute panic state, gesturing with his index finger to his lips for me to be quiet. Shh. What? I sleepily whispered. Over there. He replied, equally quiet and as nervous as before, his eyes wide like a lunatic. He motioned for me to follow him to the window adjacent. Still half asleep and quite frankly annoyed, I followed Brian to the window, noticing an awful smell that wasn't there before. I was discussing the smell. It was disgusting. It smelled like death and blood. Lots of blood. In fact, it reminded me of my grandfather's abattoir. Letting out a deep yawn and stretch as I did so, Brian spun around on his heels to face me, his face enraged. Shh! He glared. When we got to the window, he whispered once more. Look, there, in the alleyway. Do you see it? I looked at him, probably like, are you crazy, man? Rolling my eyes. I took a deep breath, and then I looked through the gap of the closed shutters. At first, nothing seemed to stand out of the ordinary. Everything was silent except for the cool breeze. And then gradually, as my eyes adjusted better, I could make out an oddity of sorts, and at a glance you wouldn't notice it. But as I watched, Brian again whispered, Keep watching. Sure enough, a few moments later this long, dark figure moved ever so slightly out of the alleyway into view, without a sound, up, yes up, the side of this building in front of us, until it eventually reached the window on the second floor. What the fuck? I whispered shakily. I looked to Brian for a second, and he was next to me, watching as well. His eyes, like mine, wide with shock and terror. What the hell is that thing? I haven't got a clue, man, but it doesn't look normal, I whispered. Now both of us were transfixed on this cruel-looking beast. As we watched, more and more detail emerged through the passing clouds with the glow of the moon above. We caught glimpses of its anatomy. Long, easily 6-inch claws on each limb. Its legs were strong and bent back like that of a canine species. I'm sure at one point I see its huge long upper and lower canines from each side of its maw. This thing was now level with the window and off to one side. I could hear my heart thumping. Heck, I could hear Brian's too. What's it doing? I said aloud. I don't know, replied Brian. Now in hindsight, obviously, I know what you're all probably thinking. And you're right. Within a matter of seconds, this beast ripped off the shutters like it was nothing but plyboard and jumped into the room inside. Myself and Brian could only watch on as lights flicked on and chaos erupted from within. A shrill screaming broke the silence, first followed by the crashing and loud growls. From our viewpoint, we could make out some of what was happening. Blood sprayed heavily across the room walls as a group of men came running into the room firing their rifles. Their shocked faces told the horrors they were seeing. They began screaming, Perro del Diablo! Perro del Diablo! Perro del Diablo! Over and over, which we would later find out meant the devil dog, the devil dog. But as the carnage was still unfolding, it took an even more dramatic turn as the huge beast came back to the window, still taking a torrent of lead from multiple directions, but seemingly unfazed or wounded. It climbed out of the window with a small child in its arms and scaled the rest of the building to the roof. Once on top, it glanced for a second towards our position, almost as if to say, You're next. Then, let out this god-awful scream or low baritone growl that ended with a howl into the night sky. And then as quick as it started, it vanished from the sight, taking an enormous leap across the rooftops, until finally out of view. All that was left was the wailing and crying coming from within the house. Myself and Brian both collapsing onto the sofa, completely shocked by what we had just witnessed. So the stories are true, I said whilst necking the rest of the beer we had missed. I can't believe it, replied Brian. Yeah, me neither. They look like... Brian interjected. Werewolves. Oh, Yeah, I guess, but surely not, right? I replied. What do we do now? I asked, thinking he would say catch the first flight home. And instead, he looked at me and said, we get the hell out of this town first light and head into the jungle. Get what we came for and then get home ASAP. I caught myself smiling but wasn't sure if it was because of the shock and nerves of the situation or because I actually kind of hyped up about getting out there and seeing for ourselves what really lied in wait for someone like me to find and collect. Still, as I agreed with Brian, I thought back to the terrifying nightmare we both had on the flight over. And of course, what we'd just witnessed. Was this all some kind of premonition? And did they hold real meaning for what lay ahead of us? At first light, we checked out and hit the streets. As we were leaving outside the hotel and off down a narrow road was the police and ambulance services. People now bustling, eager to see what had happened, all gossiping to one another. Myself and Brian stood out like a sore thumb as we made our way through the horde of locals, down further into the maze of alleyways and grottos. Soon, we were far from the scene the night before, and things seemed to return to their normal stance. People behind stalls with spices and wares of all kinds, fresh bread being baked, wafted to my nostrils like a blessing. We needed food and coffee fast, so we stopped to grab a bite to eat and calculate our next move. So what's next, David? Asked Brian whilst enjoying his fresh coffee. Well, I have to meet with a contact about 2 miles from here. Get ourselves some extra kit if you follow. And then we meet a guide that's been set up to take us 3 miles into the jungle. 3 miles? Seems a bit specific, doesn't it? Asked Brian curiously. Yes, it's because that's only how far he's willing to go. What? Why? Oh, let me guess, it's because of those devil dogs, isn't it? He complained aloud. Well, yeah, I guess so. That and the fact it used to be one of the worst areas for rebels and guerrilla warfare for over 45 years. That's why I want some form of protection or insurance. The kind of insurance that an AR-15 will only guarantee. We both laughed our butts off at the last one. But really, we knew this was going to be something extraordinarily terrifying and damn near stupid. What can I say? We were still young, and the thought of uncovering barrels filled with gold and cash made my mind swim with thoughts of extravagant spending, wining and dining the finest women in the finest restaurants the world had to offer. Finally, I would be someone. If only I knew what I know now. I know I would give up anything to stop us from entering that evil jungle. But alas, we entered the impenetrable tree line, down into the mouth of the beast, as the vines entangled around our arms and legs. Even our machetes would get caught mid-swing. Brian and I met with our contact and got ourselves properly outfitted for the night. We had night vision headsets, 4 Glock 45s, 2 AR-15s, some flashbangs, green smoke grenades. I also asked for a combat 12-gauge shotgun with grenade launcher attachment. My guy came through as promised, even down to some very handy complementary high-volt tasers. We took 2 each, and with enough ammo and firearms for a small war, we made our way to the rendezvous point, a couple of blocks away, bordering the town with an ever-ascending green jungle. It literally went from urban to raw, wild jungle. And so soon enough, our guides Henri and JJ made it to the rendezvous. They seemed a little bit quiet compared to most of the locals we'd encountered. Colombians as a whole were very proud, expressive people. They say fire runs through their blood. But Henri and JJ, they were different. Soon enough, we introduced ourselves, and we all made our way into the thick tree line. The sounds of the jungle inhabitants were so loud as birds of so many varieties flocked from tree to tree. Bugs and insects of all colours scurrying and crawling everywhere. The canopy above us seemingly miles above and impenetrable to anything. Not even sunlight could break through. Only small patches here or there would cast a beam of light through the thick, humid air. It seemed alive, almost like the trees themselves were watching, listening. Already myself and Brian were covered in mosquito bites and sweating like crazy. But we expected this, so we trudged on following Henri and JJ as they desperately hacked and sliced their way through the jungle. After what must have been about 3 hours, but felt like a lifetime, Henri cleared a section of brush and vines. He began making a small clearing and gestured for us to help as we were stopping here and making camp. After an hour or so, exhausted, hungry and riddled with mosquito bites, we each sat in our hammocks. The jungle was now getting very dark as the sun above was setting, the loud ambience of the daytime swapping that for a more quieter chorus of bugs chirping or frogs croaking. We lit a small fire and had some food and bourbon that I'd brought. Henri and JJ sat quietly watching the surrounding jungle. Every now and then they'd stop to sip his drink. JJ much the same, his mind elsewhere. The men were definitely on edge, and soon we found ourselves a little more than spooked. And for some reason or another, Brian decided to come right out with it and asked hastily, "What's the deal with the devil dogs, and why they won't go past a certain point in our journey?" Brian even tried to bribe the men with promises of large sums of cash or gold, but try as he might, Henri and JJ just shook their heads as if to say no to each and every question Brian was asking. Finally, after 10 minutes of constant badgering from Brian and myself, Henri turned to face us and moved in closer to the fire. "You must never mention them, for doing so itself draws their attention. They hunt in packs or some go rogue, but most stay within a large pack. Some say it was the devil himself who sent these creatures up to dwell on earth as servants of his will. But soon even he could not control them as their numbers grew and grew. Eventually the devil gave up and turned his back on these beasts, leaving them to free roam our cities and surrounding jungles. My great-grandfather encountered one whilst working for the cartel. He was deep into the jungle in a group of 6 men carrying supplies when they were ambushed from all sides. He could only stand frozen and watch on as his men were dragged away into the darkness, the torches fading into the abyss of the jungle. Others still laying where they'd just been attacked. He said, on that very moment, he knew he was totally and utterly alone and well over 3 miles into the jungle labyrinth. And without a further thought, he turned and ran for his life. All the while, he could still hear the cries for mercy and terrible growling that accompanied the feast. Losing his footing, mid-sprint, he tripped and flew headfirst down an embankment into a small creek. Now winded heavily, he wasted no time scurrying to his hands and knees. He hurried to cover himself in ferns and silt from the creek bed. A few moments later, he could hear them coming in his direction, and soon that familiar stench of death and blood blanketed the air around him. Off some 15 yards to his right, he'd see one of the beasts and a smaller specimen clambering through the lower canopy, both creatures more soaked with fresh blood and tissue, scanning the surrounding floor for any sign of him. Moments later they were joined by 3 more, their eyes emitting a deep red glow, almost intelligent, with their hierarchy of scouts and soldiers all being commanded by one alpha male. All Henri's grandfather could do was lay still and not utter a sound, for what must have felt like forever his very last moments on earth, and how nobody would ever know what happened here. His eyes filling with tears as he still tried to remain silent and not catch the attention of those sinister beasts. Soon there was a loud grunt, and all of the beasts raised their heads to the east, ears flicking up like that of Anubis. In seconds they were gone, back into the dense wall of greenery. Only his heartbeat thumping and heavy breath left to accompany him. Eventually, after some time, he was found wandering dazed, dehydrated, into a camp screaming, "They're gone! Gone! All of them!" The police, they came and threw him in jail. He was just crazy is what they told everyone, but soon, even they could not deny nor ignore the sudden increase of disappearances. And now, it's no joke. With that, Henri grabbed the bourbon bottle and knocked it back. Eyes staring into the firelight, JJ continued the conversation that night, speaking of 2 local black jaguar brothers. Apparently we also had to watch out for them too, as they were man-eaters. The situation with the Diablo dogs had forced these 2 predators to stick together rather than part ways. Just great, I said as he detailed the savage attacks that had taken place all around the city outskirts. Chapter 2. The Path to Exhaustion. Let's get straight into that. The next morning, we awoke early with the sun bleeding through the canopy above. Insects and birds full of life that were apparently non-existent a few hours before. Henri was nervous and quiet as ever as he packed his things, as was JJ. Brian and I sipped our coffee whilst discussing what might lay ahead for us. We finished packing our things and joined the frustrated-looking Henri and JJ as he hacked a path back into the green wall surrounding camp, the temperature already feeling hotter than the day before, and overhead a group of howler monkeys leaping and jumping their way through the dense treetops. Henri and JJ would soon leave us, and understandably, we were all nervous. But still myself and Brian trekked on, eager to see any signs of the lost empire of El Senor. Henri kept a faster pace than the day before, and before long I had to call a rest. The mosquitoes were having a buffet and Brian and I were the food. "Senor, we must push forward. We have much ground to cover and little time. JJ and I, we cannot go past the great river. We will not curse our families and ourselves. Fools with riches and greed," Henri spat. "Calm down, Henri. Please calm down. I know what you said and we agreed. You will take us as far as the great river, show us the path, and then leave. So please, calm down and give me 5, I responded. "Okay, senor," said JJ, as I gathered myself and drank some water. Henri and JJ paced back and forth, scanning the jungle high and low. "Do you believe them?" asked Brian, as I saddled up my pack onto my back with a grunt. "What? The part with the death and the creatures, or the part with the creatures and the death?" I laughed. "Why? I have no idea. I guess just nerves." Anyway, with Henri and JJ eyeing me from about 10 foot down the trail, Brian and I set off again, and this time matching the pace of our trusty guides. Within a few hours the jungle landscape took on a whole different look and feel. What was once lush, heavy green fronds and beautiful earthy brown bark on the trees now was replaced with deep dark brush and vines that hanged crisscrossed over each other, almost a natural defence, making it near impossible to penetrate through. The trees themselves looked almost dead, with gnarly thorns 6 inches in length. Brian caught his arm on one and it skewered his forearm. The bark, a much more dark brown to almost ash black. Eventually, it started to thin out a little, and we found ourselves facing a wall of tall ferns that towered overhead by a good 3 feet. A thick, low-laying blanket of fog was hovering like a scene from Tales from the Crypt back in the 90s. We expected a dark, foreboding atmosphere, even without the Diablo dogs. These dog people, or men, whatever you want to coin them. Even without their very real threats, this place, God, it'd make the hardest, most ruthless of men beg to let them leave its iron vice grip on them, or anything than continue walking within. As I watched the fog waving ever so slowly across the long grasses and ferns, I could see a couple of game trails, creating these eerie tunnels in and out of sight. The heat maintained its relentless blanket of sweat, and we were going through a water supply pretty quick. "Okay, senors, we will take you to the other side of this wetland, where you will meet with the great river. From there, we part ways, okay?" Henri said whilst he gestured with his right hand, indicating a tunnel to our left some 25 feet away. "Okay, Henri, sounds like a plan. Well, let's do it," I replied, giving him and JJ a nod. JJ and Henri took the lead, and Brian and I took their 6. As we started to enter the foreboding tunnel of brush and ferns, Henri motioned with his hand to stop. He turned and quietly said, "We must move in silence. From here on, we are in their kingdom. This is their breeding ground, and also where the males fight it out for dominance. From here on, expect them behind every tree, senors. Only shoot if you have to, please, for all of our souls." And with that, we both nodded as Henri tipped his hat to each of us and began walking down the trail. I looked at Brian, who was already looking to me, wide-eyed and sweating. "Are you ready, bro?" I said with a slight uncertainty. "Yes, let's get this money," he replied confidently, although his eyes told a different story. I nodded and fist-bumped and followed Henri and JJ, soon disappearing into the heavy fog and brush of the wetlands. Chapter 3. The Wetlands. Let's get straight into that. As soon as we entered the wetlands through the heavy walled tunnels of ferns, etc., instantly a different game altogether. There were no source of sounds, no insects, no birds, no strange lizards or brightly coloured snakes. Literally, everything seemed to either be dead or not habituated in the area. All that could be heard here and there were odd creaks and crashing in the water. But all were pretty far off, so they didn't bother us. Accompanied with the sploshing of our boots in the shallow water, the whole place felt, well, it felt like it was rigged to blow. Like any minute, almighty chaos would erupt violently. But as tense as things were, nothing had happened. However, soon we realised that it was approaching early evening. Henri and JJ both were cursing to each other and looking at us like we were the devil himself. "Signor, we will go no further. It's getting too late to even return to our last campsite, let alone get out of this wetland. JJ and I are going back to the edge of the wetlands. I don't care what you do, Signor," he said with an element of pure terror welling up inside of him. His brow dripped with beads of sweat as his shaky hand wiped a dirty red rag against it. "Henri, I paid you to get us to the river, not lost in a foggy wetland of grass taller than a bus. Bloody hell, man, where are we?" I replied, rather annoyed at his attempt to leave us out here. "How much further, Henri? At least tell me that," I added. "I do not know for certain, Signor. It's a 4-hour trek usually, but the water is unusually high. It slowed us. You have slowed us, Signor," he fired back at me, angrily. "You should reach the clearing before the river in about another 1.5 miles. But as I said, I can't be sure from here," he added. "I will pay you both double, no triple your rate, if you can get us to the river." "No, sir, I will not risk—" Suddenly, a large black creature leaps and takes down JJ, and then drags him off into the brush by his right thigh. Absolute chaos ensues as Henri screams out for JJ, and we grab our rifles in pure panic, our hearts thumping audibly through our chests. "What was that?" said Brian. "I don't know, I didn't get a good look before it dragged him off." JJ screams out in agonising pain, ringing out through the early evening. "It was a jaguar. I have seen it before. If I am right, we are both in trouble right now. It has a brother. They hunt together because of the Diablo dogs," Henri said, shaking like a nervous wreck, his rifle in his hand swivelling from left to right, looking through the crosshairs. "What? What do we do?" I was cut short, as sure enough, an enormous black jaguar growled and appeared just inside the brush some 30 feet away, its big yellow eyes with big, menacing black pupils. God, this thing's eyes spoke to your soul. It looked you down the butt of the rifle with an air of confidence, like, "Try it, buddy, I dare you." Sighting him up, this animal was insane with rage. Baring its long canines at me, it advanced. Henri then let a warning shot off at its feet, hid in the dirt, which in turn the jaguar hissed but took 2 steps back. Still, we could hear JJ's screams and angry growls soaring through the jungle. And suddenly, without warning, an enormous creature that must have crept up on all of us during the attack crashed through the brush and trees and charged the jaguar. With a roar, the jaguar leapt out of sight and away to our right, the giant creature quickly following its prey. "Sasquatch!" screamed Brian, looking more excited than scared. "What?" I questioned. "He is right, Signor. It is what your culture would refer to as Sasquatch," replied Henri. Quickly, we all ran towards the sounds of JJ being attacked. We followed a bloody trail of destruction. The brush flattened to either side, sticks and branches broken, and a lot of blood. And finally, came to a small section of a clearing, and there it was. Enormous jaws around JJ's leg, straddled on top of him, its long white claws out and digging into his body. It appeared that his rucksack was the only thing that had kept him alive to this point. Without a second thought, Henri fired into the air twice from his 12-gauge shotgun. Instantly, the jaguar released JJ and was gone without further protest. We ran to JJ, but it was soon clear his wounds were too severe to survive much longer. Henri cradled him as we looked over the extent of damage. Clearly, the femoral artery was compromised, and he was bleeding out fast. His face attacked and torn right off to one side. We did our best to comfort him as he lived his very last moments. Henri sat talking to him long after he passed. "We have to go, Henri. I'm sorry this happened, but we have to leave, I said after a moment of silence. Henri just nodded and was sat, holding JJ. We must bury him, Henri finally stated after some more minutes to himself. Okay, but we need to be quick. So Brian and Henri and I went about digging a shallow grave, and we tried to cover it with as many large stones as possible so the critters wouldn't get to him. But seriously, the critters out here were bigger than us, so who really was the critters? Well, I don't know. But anyway, we turned our attentions to the task at hand, and now that JJ was gone, Henri was okay with coming along for the ride. And so we hit the trail we were on and continued cutting our way through the vines, ferns and brush, until after 2 hours we finally broke through the tree line, and there, ahead of us, was a beautiful sight. The great river. On the other side, more thick jungle, and goodness knows how many of these beasts. And what of the supposed Sasquatch? I mean, what was his deal? Was he saving us? Or was it simply a case that we walked into his ambush? I don't know, but I'm just thankful I wasn't cat food. We followed the river downwards to the southeast, until eventually we came across an old wooden bridge. It had definitely seen its better days over 25 years before. Nevertheless, we climbed our way across the enormous, powerful river. White water crashing against dark grey and green rocks. The water, thank goodness, low at this time of year, but you could see old dried out bits of algae and grass hanging from the ropes of the bridge's construction. Halfway across, and all was going great. That was until it. I don't know if it was the Sasquatch or the Diablo dogs, but it sent my nerves through the roof as a long and sorrowful howl or scream made itself known. It sounded like pure pain and sick enjoyment all at the same time. We all glanced at each other and without another word picked up our pace across the rest of the rickety bridge. Behind us we could soon hear far off, but definitely getting closer, the crashing of trees and leaves. Another scream. Go, go, go! I said as a panic once again wrapped its cold hands around us, and soon we made it to the other side and found some cover behind a cluster of large boulders to one side of the bridge. Not a second too soon, as we turned to see two huge jet black Diablo dogs burst through the canopies and land a good 100 or maybe 150 so metres up the river from where we had came. My God, they're hunting us, I whispered. What happened next still haunts my dreams. As I whispered, one of the creatures suddenly turned its head in our direction, like it heard what I had said. Naturally, we all ducked down like school children, trying not to be caught skipping school by the teacher that spots them. Except this wasn't, and we had to do something. But what? I questioned. Then Brian tapped my shoulder with a grin on his face and says, I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. I'm all ears, I tell him. Okay, well I've got these. Seconds later, he produces 2 sticks of dynamite. Whoa, where did you get those? I asked. From some dude at the hostel. I've got some weed too, he replied, showing me another pocket full of weed. Okay, let's do it, I said. It was cut short by Henri as he reminded us that we would be stuck on this side of the river and that things are much worse this side. Still, as we continued our debate, the 2 menacing beasts approached us, following our scents. We had to do something, and fast. Okay, let's do it. We have to light them halfway across. The bridge is too big for just 2 sticks, replies Henri while scratching his head. Not a problem, senor, replied Brian, producing a stash of explosives. Alright, let's do this, I added, grabbing 2 sticks and checking the creatures' locations. They were both easily 30 metres, maybe less. On 3, we all made our way out of hiding and in full view of the beasts, and instantly they roared in unison and began running on 2 legs down the river towards our position. Go, go, go! Shouted Henri as we all screamed back at those oncoming, menacing monsters. Quickly, and as carefully as we could, we made our way over the bridge, back towards these nightmare animals from hell, back towards certain death. Thankfully, we got to our position relatively fast and set the sticks into place. We glanced at the ferocious creatures with hunger or malice in their eyes, running like men towards us. On 3, we each lit our charges and scrambled to the relative safety back across the river, back to our hiding position. The Diablo dogs now each climbing up onto the bridge, yipping like hyenas with ferocious excitement and no doubt bloodlust. 30 seconds later, just as we made the last section of bridge, the explosives went off, sending enormous splinters of wood into the air. We each had to dive from the impact of the blast. I swear, it carried us the extra 10 feet needed to get to the other side. Landed with a hard crash into the dirt. We each scrambled with panic welling inside as we tried to find our hiding position as soon as possible. Ears ringing, and my sense of balance now momentarily gone. I staggered and fell to my left, and then I spotted Brian. He was doing the same, so I grabbed him by his shirt collar and we both stumbled over to the boulders. Henri soon also found his way to the boulders, and we each sat with our backs to them. As the dust and debris stopped falling and silence returned, we all dared not move, dared not say a word to each other. Had it worked? Or were the two creatures about to reach out from the smoke with their long hair-covered arms and grab us by the face, dragging us off into the jungle, never to be seen again? 3 minutes passed, agonizingly slow. Then 5 minutes and still there was nothing. Eventually I couldn't take it any longer and had to look. And to my amazement, both of the creatures were laying in some debris on the rocks, dead and mutilated, with long bits of wood impaled through their upper torso. The bridge now gone, and what was left was burning and falling into the rapid white water. "Everyone okay?" I asked aloud. "Yeah. Yup," they each replied whilst dusting themselves down of debris and dirt. "Good. Well done both of you," I added. "If we're ready, let's go get this gold," I said as I once again slung my backpack on over my shoulders with a grunt, rolled a smoke with some of Brian's weed, and off we all headed into the jungle following this trail set before us, no doubt by the military or Escobar's movements of his cartel empire. Yep, I could smell it already. We were getting close to where we needed to be. We just hoped it would be without another encounter with more creatures. Oh, how things were only just beginning to get twisted. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I have putting it together. Not on my best form today, I have to admit, but as ever, I do hope you enjoyed the show. Much more to come from that tomorrow night, and also some true encounters. As ever, guys, if you yourself have a story, whether fictional or a true encounter and experience you had yourself that, it didn't really quite make sense and scared the hell out of you, whether it be paranormal or a Dogman encounter, or if you just want to pick my brains, get at me on the email address below, which is DMTForestOfFear@gmail.com. I hope you're all well and happy and enjoying your weekend at home with family or friends. And as ever, remember, be safe, not sorry.